And for more, we're joined by Brian Becker, National Director of the Answer Coalition. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And, many times in these kinds of meetings between, national advisors, it's where a lot of the work is taking place. It's not really the photo op that you see between, two presidents necessarily. Do you think a lot of things were happening right now despite the sanctions? Do you think that they were able to maybe normalize relations despite things changing ever since President Trump and President Putin met in Helsinki?
Well, this meeting would be an exercise in normal relations because it is normal. Even during the peak years of the Cold War, the Soviets and their American counterparts met on all kinds of issues. There were issues of nuclear non-proliferation or arms control agreements. Here you have Syria, you have Iran, you have perhaps the expansion of the military operations into outer space, which is something that President Putin tried to raise with Donald Trump at Helsinki. There's lots of issues to talk about. But I think this is just the kindling. It's not the real fire. There can't really be normal relations under the circumstances of the current political environment here in Washington, D.C. If any representative of Donald Trump's went and said, we're going to really have an significantly improved relations, they would be tarnished. They would be tarred and feathered, sort of metaphorically speaking. And so that can't really happen. So even they couldn't come out with a joint communique today. They couldn't come out with a joint communique because the American side, John Bolton, insisted that the Russians say, we agree that Russia interfered in the 2016 election, even though we deny it. The Russians came back and said, well, you must agree that America will stop meddling in the affairs of other countries. Obviously, neither side is going to sign that, so there was actually no joint communique.
Interesting. And, the two countries were on the same page before about Syria, but now, Bolton is talking about consequences against the Syrian military if chemical weapons are used in Idlib. So, John Bolton's red line is quite different than former President Obama's red line. So, how do you see things playing out there?
Well, John Bolton's comments in the recent days in the lead up to this meeting can't be considered to be anything but maximum provocation. When he says, if there are chemical weapons used once again in Syria, that there will be dire consequences in Syria, meaning against the Assad government and perhaps its allies, which would include not only Iran but possibly Russia. That's an invitation really to the armed groups that are fighting against the Assad government to stage a chemical weapons attack, because that would be the one thing that would invite U.S. military intervention into a situation where they are clearly losing the war. This was perhaps understood by the armed gangs, the armed terrorist forces in Syria, to be just that. Whether this is John Bolton being what he usually does, functioning as a firecracker, uttering provocations, or whether this was a real thing, we don't know, but it was highly provocative.
And do you think negotiation tactics can be used to ease U.S. sanctions? Maybe it didn't happen today, but do you think in the near future?
No, I actually don't. I think that the Russian government is doing everything it can to try to have normal relations, to show that they have points of congruence, conjunctural points where America and Americans must work with Russia and Russians. But given the situation in Washington, I would say no. We have intensifying sanctions, more attribution in the U.S. mainstream media for everything that's gone wrong in the United States, the fingers being pointed towards the Kremlin. There's no political will in Washington for normal relations or relief for economic sanctions, just the contrary.
Okay, we really appreciate your insight. Thank you so much. It's Brian Becker for us.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.